Elevate your hatching egg shipping business with Beyond the Egg. Discover the art of premium packaging, master the details of shipping, and create an unforgettable experience for your customers. Enhance your reputation, build lasting trust, and set your business apart as the gold standard. Visit beyondtheegg.com to begin your journey to excellence.
Welcome, poultry nerds. We are back with our favorite veterinarian, Dr. M.
I mean, out of respect, I've had my name misspelled a lot. And if I type hers really fast and don't pay attention, autocorrect will misspell it for me.
How do you spell?
There's 2 or 3 different ways. One of them involves a 4-letter word being put at the end instead of where it should be. And I just have to be careful with it. So when I type it out, I just do Dr. M because I don't
And it
want to mess it up.
automatically wants to put an H in Teresa too.
Yeah.
So, Dr. M, are you okay with Dr. M?
Sure.
It sounds like you're MI6 on a James Bond movie. So we are going to talk about some physical traits today that we see in all kinds of species, I guess, right?
Every species has little issues.
Yep. So the first thing we're going to talk about is vaulted skulls. So nothing I have has a vaulted skull.
Yeah, I don't have any crested birds.
So tell us about them, will you?
Well, you know, the vaulted skulls are most prominent in silkies. But they also have it in crested birds, so like Polish.
There's a crested duck too, isn't there?
So what is vaulted skulls?
Yes.
So that means they have a very weakened area on the top of their skull where the crest is. And this is like a genetic mutation. Abnormality bred into these type of birds. So what happens is that it's almost like the brain protruding out, but it is covered with a thin skeleton. It's very thinner. And, you know, just in general, as we work with our birds, we know that birds were built as flying machines. So their bones are really fragile and thin. I mean, they support the structures, but they are thin. If you compare the skeleton of a bird to that of a mammal, a dog, or cow, you know their skeletons are heavier because birds, by evolutionary theory, was made to be flying machines. So everything is compact, reduced, and thin wall. So the best that I can do to explain that is that if we feel our own heads, so let's feel the top of our heads and the side, you can feel that your skull is very thick, right?
Mhm.
But
My
if you
wife says
go-
that mine's really thick sometimes.
because it's protecting your brain. But well, if we think of on our skull, everything feels hard, except if we go to the temple. So the temple, if you take your eyes and move it towards the side, toward your ear, just a little north of that area is the temple. So if you feel your temple, you can feel that it's a little softer there, right? And so you can hear that if you have children and babies, you have to watch out for the temple because that's the weakest spot of the skull. So think about this for our bird skull. Now, the bird skulls are very much thinner. So if I were to take a bird skull and if I'm trying to find out why they died, I can use a regular, like a surgical scissors and just insert it and I can cut around over the whole brain and remove it. If I were to do a mammal, you need a bone, no scissors, a brain. You can already see the different segments. So for the birds, what we have is temple, which is our weak spot. And so if people hurt or puncture something in the temple, sometimes you can have a fatal injury. Crested birds like Silkie or Polish, when they're born as chicks, if you see them as chicks, they have like a little protrusion on the covered by a skull. That skull area is very, so they fall or they get some kind of trauma there, it can often be fatal as well. That's just a unique characteristic of the breed, openness.
What would be the downside to it? Can it be like too vaulted? Like, what's the downside to being vaulted?
Injury to the brain, because that area covering that little skeletal area covering it is very thin wall. And so if something hits their head, they can have brain injury.
That explains a lot with the silkies.
What have you experienced?
I don't have silkies.
Yeah, I don't have silkies either, but I've often wondered sometimes if people were like they're the animals they keep.
Well, the silkies are very unique too because they got black flesh and their feathers are like without
Structure.
So for me, like the silkies and the crevkers, which is another one just like that, I think they're fascinating because when I look at them, especially the crevkers, because they're black, it reminds me of 80s rock and the hair bands.
I think you're talking about Polish.
I mean, they all have the hair. It's like everywhere, on their head. And, back in the 80s when they had the hair bands is what I called them. They had the hair, like they would tease their hair out in Wayne's World.
Well, they can talk very beautiful, but, in order to breed like that, this is a genetic defect that was bred in.
Interesting.
So do you have to take special precautions to keep stuff from hurting their head?
Check. It is. You have to do it because it's a thin area. So if they fight among or something, whatever, they bang their head. They are prone to neurological. So that's why they often say silkies have neurological issues for the damage. But it's no more different than if you had, those little Weimaraner, those classic dog, basset hounds, where they're longer with that short little legs.
Mm-hmm.
And you got the long back like that, those dogs prone to like spinal damage.
Yeah.
So it's all, and that's a mutation too, little pugs or Frenchy bulldogs, their nose pressed into their face and they have breathing problems. So these are all part of the genetic mutation. People like the looks of them, but they do have medical issues.
Oh, right. That makes more sense. Okay, the next physical trait we want to talk about is removing the spurs. That seems to be pretty controversial. So can you do it safely?
You would need to trim it. You can never remove the spur entirely because if you look at one of my handouts that you guys posted, it's called Medical Management of the Rooster of the Spur.
Mm-hmm.
Then those handouts. And so in that article, you will see an x-ray of an actual foot that I taxidermied. And then another one is the actual foot itself. So when you look at it, the spur, think of it as a material similar to the beak, our fingernails, horn. It's keratin, nice structure. And so technically, like a fingernail, like take your finger, put it up to the sun. You can't see through where your flesh is, but you can see like white clear areas where you can see your fingernails, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you would need to just cut that fingernail area. And if your fingernails are cut very close to your meat, you won't see any of like maybe white translucent areas when you put your hand up to the sun. And so just think about it. You wouldn't want a dog guillotine cutter to cut it. You don't want to cut it because you don't know where your flesh is, and then it's going to bleed. So just like our dog toenails and cat toenails, you have to watch out where you're clipping so that you don't clip KWICK, which is where blood vessels shoot out. So some people, if they want to, they can't cut the spur out entirely, because if you look at that photograph, there's a bone in there. If you do a guillotine cut, you're actually cutting bone. You'll be having it open like a fracture. And bacteria can go in there because, it's on so they're going to be near the ground, their poop or whatever. Bacteria can get in there and you can have some infection of the bone, which is bad for the bird.
No, that'll be really bad.
Yeah, so the best way to do is you got to hold your bird up. You can take it to a dark room or bright light cue for candling and see where you have the, where you can see that it's just the nail. And then maybe you put a little Sharpie pen permanent marker there. So when you take your bird out, you can just get like a drill and kind of sand that down. You could use your guillotine cutters, but again, there's different type of dog nail cutters. So you'd have to get the guillotine one. You've got to make sure that you see it. Dremels are always some of the better tools to use. I think if people are not used to, you might get them training from, your veterinarian or something. Or because it's pain. I think the old method people used to try to twist it off. A lot of good things like pulling out your fingernail. And that sore.
Oh, like the thought of that just.
Like torture topics today.
Yeah. So I cheat.
The brain.
When I have to trim spurs, I use a piece of 5/8 inch thick aluminum, got holes drilled in it, and it's on a piece of flat bar, so it's screwed to a piece of wood out in the chicken yard, and I stick the spur through that, and I have a really, really fine tooth saw, and I cut it with that, because 5/8 of an inch is more than past that quick part. So, I've had ingrown toenails before, and that just seems like an extreme amount of pain. So I err on the side of caution when it comes to cutting those, because that's gotta hurt.
When you think about it, why do they have spurs? They have spurs for defense. They're defending their hen flock or something, right? So in order, actually, they always say, do you really want aggressive roosters? The really aggressive ones that, you might have to take the trash can or carry a broom when you're out there. But one of the ways that you can manage from having aggressive roosters, you probably don't want just one rooster. If you can have more birds, then you probably want to have 2 roosters, because then they fight among themselves and they don't fight with you for dominance. But then you have to think about, if you have roosters, if you have little kids around, your children or your grandchildren, you don't want to have very aggressive roosters moving. And it's not their fault. They're not aggressive. They're just being protective of their hens.
Well,
Yeah. And that's a natural thing. It's a visual thing that, maybe the females are more attractive to, not only by the combs and wattles, but also maybe the size of their spurs too. But so always think about, are there other ways I can use, or do I want to breed aggressive birds? So always know what other things you can do to manage that, because I'm sure nobody wants a fingernail pulled out.
Quit saying that.
We trim,
just all of that just sends chills on my spine.
File it down, But really, in the action of a defense, and I've only read someone in Southeast Asia, I believe it was Thailand, there's a report of somebody being killed by the spurs of a peacock, and they were feeding them, and they were confined area. So if you do have very aggressive, sometimes maybe you need to wear hats, or don't corner them to make them feel defensive, because even if you trim your spur, if it's a sharp spur, that blunt thing can also go into your temple. Just instead of being a pokey thing puncturing you, it'll be a dull puncture, you know? So if you need to have aggressive rooster, you might wear protective covering around your or something.
Keep your head on a swivel when you're out there taking care of them.
Yeah, you got to watch.
All right, well, let's move to the other end and talk about combs. Combs and wattles. So can you tell us about the purpose of the combs and wattles?
Well, the combs and wattles are like, I would say they would have two functions. One would be that they are vascularized, which means they have a lot of blood vessels there. So oftentimes you would see like the different colors of the combs of pale or the cold or whatever. But usually when they're bright red, because there's a lot of blood vessels there. And so combs and wattles, they help to dissipate the heat because, as you know, birds cannot sweat. And so they help dissipate the heat for the bird. They're also for attracting the hens. The more dominant roosters have larger combs, brighter red, and that would be it. Except in the case if you only have one rooster, it really doesn't matter, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
They don't have a lot of choices then.
What about dubbing them, cutting off the combs and wattles?
So the question is, why would we want to cut off the combs and wattles? And probably fighting among henmates or damage comb. The other thing is that if you are involved in game fighting, you probably want to dub that because that our area of the bird. This is an illegal activity, but you might do that when they're fighting. I guess they don't attack hard to get a hold of the bird and jab them with the spurs.
Mm-hmm.
So you would see dubbing in, I believe, for those people raiding older game birds. Maybe some people prefer it dub. Other people might dub because they're worried. But if you're going to be dubbed, that thing in a bird is full of blood vessels. That ain't going to be a pretty sight. Cutting that. Maybe it'd be like someone cutting your earlobe.
Okay. So what age do you dub them?
I would say that you would dub them early on when they're very young. And you just use a dubbing scissors or regular surgical scissors and have it aseptic, which is clean. And then you burn. People don't know the procedure. You can always talk to your veterinarian. But, we try to do it only if you really need it.
I would imagine that hurts.
Yeah, it's like maybe cutting off your earlobe.
Yes. I don't know. I don't have these kinds of animals, so I know these questions are out there because it gets done, but I don't have firsthand knowledge with it.
Well, I know like people that show game fowl, part of their standard requires that adult birds be trimmed. I always thought it was weird, but yeah.
If you probably want to do it at a day of age when they're small, there's some blood vessels, of course, but a lot and a bigger wound. Like turkeys, some are defluted, especially in commercial production. They have little new just above their external their eyes, little fleshy tag. Usually they remove it in commercial production at day of age. Then they won't have that large dangling because your property has this bacteria called Persepolis. It can cause that snood to get inflamed and swollen at the sacking. Male turkeys always fighting each other with dangling like a worm. So they're attracted up like on it. That's how the bacteria gets in there, makes it swollen. And unfortunately, the birds die because the bacteria go.
Well, I have a lot of turkeys, and I just learned something completely new. I had no idea people cut their snoods off.
But the commercial ones, where you have a lot of turkeys in a building.
Like the broad-breasted type that are bred for commercial production. Like they'll cut those off.
Because, they have a lot of turkeys in a confined area. And as they grow and mature into the tom turkeys, you're going to see that like little worm moving around and they pick at each other. You might not see that in backyard flocks because most people would want to get a snood, and they probably more access to space, or they don't have many males together. As you know, in any bird species, a male.
We'll be right back.
Looking to rock some seriously comfy gear? If you love chickens and you're all about that fun style, then Chicken Box has got the perfect t-shirts for you. From quirky designs to classic looks, their shirts are as comfy as us chicken tenders deserve. They even have a subscription service so your coop doesn't get bored. Head over to PoultryNerdsPodcast.com and click on Chicken Box to get your comfy shirts and support the podcast.
Okay, so in the wintertime, does Vaseline really help prevent frostbite on the wattles in the
Well, initially you might think because oil keep the cold away, but it really doesn't, because if we remember earlier on that birds do not sweat. And remember I was telling you about the comb, is that's how they dissipate heat, and they need to have it, otherwise they can't release any body heat. And so if you put the Vaseline there, sometimes if the birds might have moisture, and then so you've got water trapped underneath there, and depending on what temperature, they will freeze too. So actually it might even make your frostbite worse. But when we talk about frostbite, the best thing to do is to provide coop during the winter time for your bird to come in. And that tube has to have good ventilation because we don't want high ammonia levels, otherwise we get most of it. But birds can survive very cold temperatures if they're protected from the wind and rain or snow, which is water. And so that's the thing that causes things to freeze. So you keep them in there, you insulate the house well, it's going to wait you to. But actually, most people, if you keep your birds free range outside, you want to keep your birds indoor because of predators. Unless you have vegetation or bushes around that they can, nobody wants predators, foxes, coyote, bear, come around and eat chickens while they're asleep. You can have a horned owl. So most times if you keep your birds outside, free range, you want to keep them indoors. Exhibition birds need outside in cages. The other thing people say is that if you've got very cold winter, you might want to get cold hardy birds, those that are used to the cold rather than Mediterranean breeds, like not too what in the cold. They are single cold, large cold birds. So they can get frostbite. They are raised in cold. But the best way to prevent frostbite is to provide shelter, no exposure to the wind, some waters.
Okay, let's assume they do get frostbite. What could we do for them?
So the first thing, like if the temperature went down, the next morning you should look at the combs of the bird, and like the early initial stages of frost look pale and wax. The later stages, when there is bad frostbite, there is necrosis that kicks. So those are just dead tissue. That thing is just like people that have frostbite on their toes. Off.
So there's not really anything you can do at that point.
So if you've got it black already, if they're kind of white and waxy, you want to warm them up. Because just like people that get frostbite You can't, like, somebody is very cold and they're cold or blue or something. You can't heat them right away and put direct heat. That even causes worse if you've learned in first aid for frostbite. So the best thing is to warm them up gradually, no direct heat on the tissue. But that's in the early stages. Once you see that black thing, like frostbite, it's
Just there.
people, you'd lose your toes.
I had a coach in a couple years ago, and he got frostbite. He wasn't named yet because I wasn't for sure I was going to keep him, but he got frostbite and he lost all the tips on his comb, and he looked like he had a 80s mohawk afterward. It was just really smooth. So I named him Frosty. And he went on to be a good breeder for somebody because it wasn't genetic. And not
Cosmetic.
exactly. He just couldn't be shown at that point.
But like when we see darkened tip on the stuff, we always have to think, is it frostbite? Rule out pedimate fighting. But the other thing is like bird microtoxin, fungus that causes rot with veins. And that would be the only other thing that would cause necrosis. But hopefully people are keeping their chicken feed properly stored. That's another thing.
All right. The last physical trait we're going to talk about is trimming the nails and the beaks.
So, trimming the nails and the beak. So, if you are having usually this is a problem with birds kept in cage, that they don't have anything to wear down there. Yeah. So, what you would do is similar to your spur. Those are like pro nail too. And so you would just cut where you don't feel it quick on the nail.
Yeah, that's pretty easy. I do that when I'm taking them to a show. But the beaks, everybody always has questions about the beaks. And trimming a beak is very different than what the commercial layer houses do, which is called debeaking.
So there's debeaking where they actually cut the beak when the birds are a day of age. But that is the birds are hard to eat. Other people would say it's cruelty, but that thing has been used to try to prevent cannibalism. But that is like actual cut to right instead of the narrow. Probably best done again at the younger age rather than need to be at least more than nickels with from the exterminaries, but that is commercial. It's now if you talk about the trimming, this usually you might see problems in parrots or chickens. Sometimes it is a genetic defect, and the birds are born with scissors feet, where they're not aligned, because normally the upper beak and lower beak, the tip of the beak should, if they don't match, that could probably be a genetic defect in that breed. So you might have to make, do I want to keep, that as a breeder? And you can keep it as a bird, but just know that these type of birds need to eat more mash feed, and you should have a lot. Because if there's very few food in your feed tray, they're going to have a hard time to eat with that malformation of the beak. But if you had a lot of mashed food, a lot of food, those birds can survive by eating, because main thing is that they need to eat. And periodically you look at them to make sure there's no food buildup that can cause food buildup in the area that would
Like an impacted crop or something along those lines.
rot, and it might smell those birds. So I said that could be a genetic defect, but it also could be from injury. Something getting stuck in a wire gauge cage or something and causing trauma. And then for that life of the bird, you need to, if the beak is so malaligned, it won't get is normal. And so the beaks don't match, so they can't wear it down. So that's where you may have to file it down, or they get very severe and they can't eat as it grows and curves. It's a little harder because it's harder to see, but you're not going to hit like this.
Yeah, I use a metal file, and you just go slow and just keep trimming just a little bit of hair dust off at a time until it gets where you need it to be.
Oh, damn dear. It's
Okay, I have
a similar one, malocclusion.
I have another question that wasn't on your list, so we're going to go off the top of your head for this one. You ready?
Uh-oh.
I saw it in a group on Facebook, and I looked it up, and I don't think it's true, but I want to get your opinion. Somebody said that if the wattle was missing on a male chicken, it would be sterile. True or false?
I would think that is false.
I would say there's no correlation, right?
Well, because you remember, we could cut the wattle off. So by that token, it would be false.
What if it was hatched that way? Would it still not make a difference?
I don't think so. I don't know of any research that would correlate the testes with the appendage.
Yeah.
Or testosterone will make it bigger or red, more blood vessels in there, but not like it disappears. It wouldn't.
I told him I said it was a myth. I didn't believe it at all.
Because there's a lot of people that raise game fowl that dove their birds. And there's no way they would do that if their birds were sterile after they dubbed them.
And then if they were, let's say that they didn't have that because they didn't have testosterone, well, they wouldn't be fighting birds, wouldn't they? Because it'd be all like.
That's true too.
Potato.
They would become a couch potato.
Oh, here's another one, bringing that up. One more, and then we'll call it a day. What do you think about capons? Do you think people should do that, or is that reserved for vet to do?
Out of curiosity of those old mail catalogs, I remember buying a caponizing kit. And so basically it was a bunch of rope and scalpel blade. I was a really primitive. That was the older day. I would do that because the testes are located in the body of a bird, and just opening and causing an open wound and taking that out is not a good thing. You probably could lose your bird. And these kind of surgeries should be done, in a veterinary office if you need to do it. It's just like somebody and they opened them up and they took out their kidneys.
Yeah. You would want that done in at least a remotely clean environment. And then that bird would need to stay in at least a remotely clean environment until it heals up. Or you're just asking for infection and a long laundry list of other stuff. I don't think the risk would be worth it.
No.
Just hatch more so you can get some hens.
Think about it. What is the big reason that you would want to caponize a rooster? Are you raising them for meat?
Yeah, meat.
Yeah, the roosters are bigger. But I can say that if you separate them out as soon as you can tell who's who and put all the roosters together with no hen, they don't fight. I mean, if it's genetic for some to be aggressive, then yeah, but like a Rhode Island Red or, a Barred Rock or an Orpington, they're not going to do it.
No, because there's nobody to be competitive against. For what? Nothing. They're always, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. M, it has been a pleasure. You can go back into your Secret Service MI6 status now.
Okay.
I do appreciate you coming on and talking to us about these. I learned some stuff myself. I did not realize that about the crested birds.
Where are the turkeys?
So, yeah, I didn't realize that about turkeys either. I didn't know they cut that off. I just thought it was like a bred-in mutation or something like everything else.
Do they put it on a keychain like they do rabbit feet?
No.
Oh,
You might find it on eBay. You can get just about everything else there.
exactly.
You can freeze dry it.
Why? Is it a delicacy or something?
No, I mean, if you want to preserve it as a keychain.
Oh, gotcha.
But
I'm good.
I'm good. Yeah.
that's more like for commercial birds. Most people like to see that. Snoods. Yes.
All right. Well, we appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this week. Before you go, be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can receive new episodes right when they are released. And they're released every week. Feel free to email us at poultrynerds@gmail.com to share your thoughts about the show. Until next time, Poultry Pals, keep clucking, keep learning, and keep it exciting. This is Carey signing off from Poultry Nerds. Feathers up, everyone.